In season 4 of Boardwalk Empire, Nucky gives Chalky White a club on the boardwalk in exchange for his help in the previous season. One of Nucky's employees gets involved in a skifuffus with one of Chalky's business associates, killing him. The man's employer enters the scene, wanting justice for the deceased, but also using this as an opportunity to muscle in on Chalky's operation. The employer in question, Dr. Valentin Narcisse. Narcisse fancies himself as something of a champion of the black race, or the Libyans as he calls it. He propagates the education and betterment for the life of black Americans, but at the same time he controls the heroin trade in Harlem and is extremely powerful, to such an extent no one, not Nucky, not Chalky or anyone, could foresee how everything goes to shit once Chalky gets on the wrong side of him and engages in an all-out war, which ends up involving also the likes of Joe Masseria. I really liked Narcisse as the primary antagonist of the season. Bobby Cannavale as Gyp Rossetti was incredible in the previous season, but he was a pantomime villain, a man-child. Narcisse is skillfully cunning and thinks long-term. He carries himself with an aura of respect, accountability and control, which makes him compelling and dangerous, but also makes his rare outbursts all the more memorable. I mentioned in previous reviews of Boardwalk Empire that I wasn't the biggest fan of the first 2 seasons, but I really enjoyed the third one. I'd say I'd put this one above even the third. It was very enjoyable. The structure of the individual stories and arcs was a lot more accomplished here. You have fictional characters and events skillfully being weaved in and out of historical ones, and different characters who we've been following in different threads have their paths crossed in ways that don't feel contrived, but rather it's cool seeing all these colourful characters that we've seen, whose personalities we understand, all interacting with each other. There's a strong collection of memorable characters in this season, and that includes some of the regulars that have had their relatability strengthened over previous seasons. Chalky finally has a lot to do aside from standing around grimacing. In fact, most of the story revolves around him. You have Gaston Means, the private investigator, and his elegantly witty and poetic way of speaking that is a joy to watch. The likes of Arnold Rothstein have much to do, and Charlie Luciano's power grows and grows as he comes to prominence. Van Nelson's downward spiral is bemusing and painful to watch. Richard Harrow puts down his gun and tries to live a peaceful and fruitful life, and Al Capone finally takes over the Chicago outfit. Even Nucky's butler has a compelling arc. Most of the gangsters in this show, both fictional but mainly the real historical characters like Luciano and Capone, have been bit players in the past, but in season 3 it looked like they were slowly being brought to the forefront. Boardwalk Empire was fumbling around for a few seasons, unsure of what it wants to be and what it wants to explore. Some might make the argument that the series started too early, and it should have been set a few years after where it was actually set. I don't think there's anything wrong with where the series started. It's cool seeing all these real-life criminals in their early years, but you want to see them in their prime, and now it looks like Boardwalk is finally a fully fledged gangster TV show. It's finally becoming what I wanted it to be in the first place. There's several real-life famous events covered in this season, and it's really interesting the way they do it by combining the facts with their own creative license. They've set up some strong stories to be explored in future seasons, so not only is season 4 a thrilling watch on its own, but acts as a prequel for what might go on to be considered the landmark events of the series. Now, saying that, I am fully aware, as you probably already are, that no, there wasn't several more seasons of Tommy gun shootouts and mob wars, because unfortunately the series, just as it started getting really good, just as it became really interesting, was cancelled, and the showrunners were given 1 season to wrap things up. So season 5, from what I hear, it jumps way forward in the timeline and skips much of what was set up in this season, and apparently it's really rushed. It's a shame, because Boardwalk Empire seemed to be the TV show that promised a serial account of the Prohibition era gangsters and the early days of the Mafia. but a lot of the prominent criminal figures like Al Capone barely figured. And then slowly and slowly they got bigger parts in the series, and then just as you think, yeah, now it's going to get good and we'll see these guys in their prime, they cancel it. So I watched Charles Luciano act like a temperamental teenager in the hope of seeing him flourish as one of the most important gangsters in American history, but what you're telling me is that moment will never come? This is edging in its purest form. I don't know why exactly they cancelled the series. I heard that though the ratings were high, the popularity didn't justify the production costs. And when HBO has other expensive properties like Game of Thrones and they need to act something, you know for sure it isn't going to be the most popular TV series of the 21st century. I also heard that a lot of the crew, like Winter and Scorsese, wanted to move on and were excited to start work on Vinyl, a series that was ironically cancelled just after one season. So all in all, this is my favourite season of the series. The characters are fascinating and the events are gripping. Some of the acting on display is top tier stuff, and it's very violent, with a lot of the blood effects, background CGI and other stuff pulled off very convincingly. They made some brave decisions, like reducing Margaret, Nucky's wife, to a minor role. The thing is, she's out of his life now, so serves little purpose in this show where screen time is a precious commodity. So whereas previous seasons or other shows might have had her gone out with a bang, a big death scene or something, or have had her involved in the main story in some contrived way, Season 4 of Boardwalk just says, you know what, you've exhausted your usefulness and we don't need you now, goodbye. And it's that kind of willingness to take risks and shake things up a little that I think makes this season the best so far, just about edging out Season 3.